Four stories have emerged around the moon and the wider sky. A reported image said to show a huge disc-shaped object near the moon. New claims from researchers in Ukraine describing multiple enormous unidentified objects moving across or near the lunar surface. A SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket stage has actually crashed into the moon. And a comet that suddenly became thousands of times brighter earlier this year has continued to attract attention from astronomers. On the surface, these stories appear to have very little in common, but put them together and they raise an obvious question. What exactly are we seeing when we look up at the moon? Before we go any further, there's something important I want to make clear. None of these stories by themselves prove the existence of any kind of extraterrestrial spacecraft. Some involve genuine astronomical events. Some involve scientific observations that remain disputed. And some claims circulating online cannot currently be independently verified. So rather than telling you what these objects are, we're going to examine what has actually been reported, what the evidence shows, and where the speculation begins. Let's go. UAP News August 2026. The reported Chinese moon image. Let's start with the most controversial story this week. In recent days, claims have circulated online concerning an alleged Chinese image or leak said to show a large disc-shaped object associated with the moon. The image has been presented in some corners of the internet as evidence that Chinese authorities may possess imagery of something unusual operating near the lunar surface. But there is a problem. The underlying claim has not been independently established. I have not been able to find any reliable evidence showing that the Chinese government has officially released or authenticated a photograph of an enormous extraterrestrial craft flying over the moon. And that distinction really matters, because an image being described as a government leak does not make it a government-confirmed image. In the age of social media, a photograph can acquire an extraordinary backstory within hours. The original source can disappear, metadata can be missing, and context can be easily removed. And suddenly, an unidentified object becomes a Chinese government disclosure. Now, those are two very different things. So, for now, this story belongs in the unverified category. It's interesting, it's worth watching for sure, but it should not be presented as proof at all. But that brings us to something considerably more interesting, because the next story does involve researchers who say they actually studied unusual objects near the moon. The Ukrainian moon observations. Researchers associated with Ukraine's main astronomical observatory have published a series of papers and preprints examining unidentified objects observed near the moon. One of their more recent studies describes more than 20 objects recorded in high-speed observations. The researchers divide the objects into different categories and report unusual changes in brightness, apparent movement, and in some cases, extremely large estimated dimensions. Some of the most extraordinary claims concern objects described as disc-shaped or toroidal. In one version of their analysis, the researchers estimate some of the disc-shaped objects at roughly 25 to 40 kilometers across. They also describe objects apparently moving at several kilometers per second. If those measurements are correct, we are just not talking about any ordinary aircraft or anything human. We'd be talking about objects on a scale comparable to cities. Now, the researchers go even further. They argue that the observations could be consistent with the moon acting as a base for unidentified objects, and suggest that some of the phenomena could represent technological activity.
One of the most exciting things about the recent Artemis missions to the moon is the promise, maybe that's strong, the hope that we'll see humans living on bases out of our celestial neighbor. But maybe we're jockeying for that real estate because a team of Ukrainian researchers say they've discovered evidence of a possible UFO base that is already on the moon. In a new study, researchers at Ukraine's main astronomical observatory say that they have found more than 20 UFOs, or UAPs as they're also called, moving near and across the moon over the course of 2025. The scientists apparently used a high-speed camera attached to a telescope to capture the objects, which can allegedly move at blinding speed. Researchers say they tracked one object moving at 4.1 miles a second. That's right around what the space shuttle needs for liftoff. And the researchers also say that they were able to use light to measure the size of the objects, which, by the way, are apparently massive. One of the objects allegedly measured about 25 miles across. You know, that's larger than the island of Manhattan.
But this is where we really need to slow down, guys. These claims are made by the researchers directly. They are not established discoveries of extraterrestrial spacecraft. The work is available as preprint material and has not passed the kind of independent peer review and confirmation that would be required before extraordinary conclusions could be accepted as scientific fact. There is another important question too. How accurately can the size and speed of a tiny distant feature be reconstructed when it is being observed against the moon? Because if the initial identification is wrong, the calculations that follow can also be misleading. And that is precisely why this story is so interesting. Not because it proves a lunar civilization, but because it gives us a specific claim that can actually be investigated. And then, almost unbelievably, something did happen to the moon. The SpaceX rocket that hit the moon. Earlier this month, a discarded SpaceX Falcon 9 upper stage made an uncontrolled journey towards the lunar surface. On August the 4th, the roughly 4-ton rocket stage struck the moon at approximately 5,400 miles per hour near the Einstein crater region. Unlike a science fiction scenario, there was absolutely nothing mysterious about what this object was. It was a human-made piece of space hardware. The upper stage had originally launched a lunar mission in January 2025. After completing its mission, it was left in space, where gravitational and solar effects gradually altered its trajectory until it ultimately intersected the moon. And now we have something particularly valuable, like a real impact site. A South Korean lunar spacecraft has captured before and after imagery showing the newly formed crater and disturbed lunar surface. Ground-based observations also detected material associated with the impact plume, giving scientists another opportunity to study what happens when a large artificial object hits the lunar surface. And this is where our 4 stories begin to overlap. Because the moon isn't just a distant light in the sky anymore. It's becoming a place where increasingly large numbers of human spacecraft, satellites, and pieces of space hardware are operating. Which means, really, that when something unusual appears near the moon, identifying exactly what we're looking at becomes increasingly more important. The strange case of 220p McNaught. And finally, we have one of the strangest astronomical events of the year. Comet 220p McNaught experienced a spectacular outburst around the end of May. Its brightness increased by roughly 7 magnitudes, and with some observations suggesting an increase of around 7,000 times. The comet developed a much larger coma and a visible tail, turning what had previously been a relatively faint object into something dramatically brighter for a short period of time. And this is where some of the online reporting gets a little bit ahead of the science. You may have seen claims that McNaught is continuing to grow brighter and larger and brighter and larger. Now, the observations available don't really support that conclusion. In fact, after the spectacular outburst, the comet has generally been fading. That's not necessarily less interesting. In fact, it's arguably more interesting because astronomers, they just still don't exactly know what triggered such a dramatic event. Possibilities include a major eruption of material from the comet itself, or some event affecting its surface. And because cometary activity can be extremely unpredictable, another outburst simply cannot be ruled out. So once again, we're left with an observation followed by a question.